All right, good evening, YouTube. My name is karelstandstrength.com. In today's video, myself and my friend Landon is going to go over the basic fallacy or maybe even the potential facts of just get stronger. Oftentimes when it comes to strength and hypertrophy information and content, like we'll hear this and get 2 different messages depending on how you interpret this thing. So like I said, my name is Karel, standstrength.com, and I am joined by...
My name's Landon, got the channel based in bodybuilding. So thanks for having me on, Karel. This is pretty much the meat and potatoes of my channel right here. I have a few different kind of somewhat unique lifting philosophies. I'm obviously more hypertrophy focused. So yeah, this is right up my alley. I'm pumped to get into it. So thanks for having me on. Thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, because I really like your channel. I really like how it's giving me like opportunities to rethink a lot of things that I believe. Now, with that being said, I do find myself someone who does buy into the just get stronger a bit more than other people. I think that like a strong muscle is a big muscle and there's like kind of no going around that. But with that being said, that kind of assumes things that are maybe outside of what most people have in mind. So let's get into some of the assumptions that people have whenever they hear just get stronger. So first and foremost, whenever someone hears like just get stronger, I think that what they hear is this: weight on the bar is what matters most for hypertrophy. They like, for whatever reason, when they hear just get stronger, that pops in their head. The next thing that they'll do practically as they start to implement this idea of just get stronger is that they'll modify their form over time to optimize more load being lifted rather than optimizing their form for hypertrophy. And then another thing that just get stronger assumes is that you understand the nuances between how you train a compound lift in isolation, your volume management, your fatigue management, the relationship between volume, intensity, and frequency. And then finally, that you use lifts that are most often used to express strength. So squat, bench, dead, your rows, and your overhead press. So part of the reason why I put this all together is because when you have the idea of just get stronger, all of the things that most people will use to defend this idea will kind of say that just get stronger works without these assumptions. But that brings into question whether or not just get stronger is valid to bring up. So what are your thoughts on that? And do you think I've diagnosed the kind of issues with just get stronger pretty well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I have here is going to be one, using the lifts that express strength the most. So the lifts that we can load the most. I mean, there's no wonder why people care so much about squat, deadlift, and bench. I think that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. And then obviously optimizing your leverages so you can put the most weight on the bar. I think that plays to people's strengths and also hides their weaknesses at the same point, which is not necessarily what we're looking for hypertrophy, because obviously that logically creates an imbalanced physique. If you keep running away from your weaknesses, like, yeah, I mean, in strength, you can avoid your weak spots, like with a wider grip bench or a low bar squat or whatever. But in hypertrophy, you can't run away from it. You have to train everything because that's ultimately what a complete physique is. And when it comes to using certain lifts, this is something that I haven't talked too much on my channel, and I hinted at it in my last video, but one of my newer lifting philosophies that I'm still kind of developing is what I call like your lifting social status. And this is going to be geared a little bit more towards like the just get stronger mindset. So I have a little note here that I want to read off to you guys. So strength is socially competitive in its nature, leading to an emphasis on universal lifts that we can load the most weight on, such as the squat, bench, and deadlift. So obviously these are all universal. We can all compare ourselves to each other with these lifts and compare our strength, which is a distraction for hypertrophy. But to continue on my point, when you put the most effort into these lifts that I would call incomplete for hypertrophy purposes, you automatically apply less effort to the rest of your training if most of your focus goes towards it's front loaded onto your squat, bench, and deadlift. Therefore, nothing else can be as focused because that would be the most focused. So even with impressive squat, bench, deadlift numbers or any other basically lift that you can load up a bunch that we care about, like the overhead press or barbell row or whatever, your physique will be lacking. That's why so many powerlifters are jacked, but people are more impressed by bodybuilders' physiques, even when overall muscle mass is equated. It's the smaller muscles that don't necessarily get work in those big, heavy, loadable strength movements that yeah, I mean, powerlifters can be just as jacked as a bodybuilder. Let's say we take 200, two 200-pound people, a powerlifter and a bodybuilder, both at the same body fat percentage. The bodybuilder is going to win 10 out of 10 times for the better physique. So are we just chasing strength and to be like a little bigger on like our quads and traps, or do we want an overall well-rounded, impressive physique? I mean, I'd take the second option. So
I don't know why this came to mind, but have you ever seen that meme where it's like, I think it's an Irish or Scottish guy. He's like, what weighs more, a kilogram of feathers or a kilogram of steel? A kilogram of steel, because steel is heavier than feathers. And then like he had a whole mental breakdown because he just couldn't like come to grips that a kilogram and a kilogram are the same. You know, the contents are different. So maybe that's kind of like what we like are with like size and strength. Maybe, I don't know. That was just a kind of funny aside, but no, I totally 100% agree. Like, I really do think that, especially because of that recent video from NH, like strength standards and how they're kind of useless for hypertrophy. Like, I have like some parts of it that I agree with, some that I disagree with. But what I like from what you said is that by its very nature, there's a social status associated with it. So we want to be able to, for whatever reason, good or bad, be able to say, but can you deadlift this amount? Or like, sure, you're big, but can you bench this amount? Like, for whatever reason, to kind of justify one person's strength over another person's. So that's very interesting. I didn't really think about that, but I really do like that. And then one thing I do want to say here for, like, let's say more strength oriented people, or like one thing that can't be over or understated is the fact that just because it's not optimal for hypertrophy doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't elicit hypertrophy. It just doesn't do so in optimal amounts. So oftentimes, and we'll get to this later, and as we kind of break down into some of the fallacies, we kind of have this either or mentality. You're either lifting for strength or you're lifting for size. You're either lifting for one or the other, when in reality they do have a relation between them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we can just equate, oh yeah, just get stronger or just get big. Like, there has to be a little bit more nuance to the advice, which is assumed but isn't actually like practical, which is why the idea and the like us saying to people just get stronger might not be the best way to approach things. But we'll kind of go into that, and we'll do that with this first point. So the first one that I wanted to kind of talk about, the first fallacy I want to bring up, is the hasty generalization. So like one definition of this is, just because one person or one instance supports your conclusion, that in and of itself is not enough of a sample size to support the conclusion. So, like, for example, all the best bodybuilders are/were strong, or insert your favorite bodybuilder here, let's say Arnold, Franco Columbu, or whoever was strong. So to get bodybuilder big, you have to get strong. So let's say, for example, you say to someone, just because one person exists that supports your conclusion, that doesn't mean that's the only thing you need to do. But my problem with that is that there is a big enough sample size. I don't think that anyone who was an Olympic, like an Olympia champion, would be ever classified as weak. They might not be the world's strongest man, but they're in that territory, in my opinion. Like, and let's say they did like use other lifts other than the squat, bench, and deadlift. They probably had top tier strength in whatever lifts they did use: hack squats, dumbbell bench, hammer strength bench, or even like stiff-legged deadlifts. I do think that the amount of load that they put their body through was more than enough to say that they are probably one of the strongest people to do so. And their muscle hypertrophy kind of reflects that. What are your thoughts on that first point?
yeah, I mean, I think you're pretty much spot on with that. One of the first things that comes to my mind is there's a couple different ways that you can get stronger. So in the most simplistic way to describe this, when you're getting stronger on a certain lift, it's going to be primarily driven through a skill that you're learning, that your body's adapting to, or it's going to be from increased muscle mass. And those are the two drivers of strength. So when you take these bodybuilders that, let's say, you don't even touch like a barbell or any crazy compound movements or anything, but you build up muscle through other lifts, you eventually have some of that coordination and you have the muscle mass to support a pretty quick increase in strength if you were to go down that avenue. So I also think this applies for the other way around. So powerlifters and any type of other strength athlete, obviously it's not going to be difficult for them to go into more of a hypertrophy route because they already have the skill and they have the muscular endurance to make it through some hypertrophy workouts versus if you're just taking a total beginner and they don't have the endurance or the skill to get through even a hypertrophy workout. That's going to be a little bit different. So you take somebody that's a Mr. Olympia and they have literally the most muscle on the planet. It's not going to be that tough for them to build up a little bit of strength because they already have perfected at least half of the variables that you need to actually get stronger. So when you have all that muscle and you've perfected lifts that are kind of similar to those big three in their own ways, it's going to be pretty easy for that person to make that translation over. So obviously, if they just got stronger on the big three and trained like a powerlifter, they wouldn't be Mr. Olympia. They'd probably still be big, but I think what it comes down to is building that muscle mass in the first place that allows them to pretty quickly build up some strength. A perfect example that I have is myself. I built up a decent amount of muscle and then I doubled my total, not actually, but I added a ton of weight to my squat, bench, deadlift total, but it didn't really get me any bigger. And that's when I started to think about this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I also want to talk about too is like the flip side of it. So let's like look at a hasty generalization with powerlifting. Like I think Candido Candido kind of gets brought up a bit for this. It's kind of like, well, Candido's not that big, but he's strong as hell. So it's kind of like, so powerlifting is like horrible for hypertrophy. But then look at the top level powerlifters too. Like some of them, they are like gorilla looking like people, like the biggest yokes and biceps you've ever seen in your life. But that's probably a bit more to genetics and everything like that. But it's kind of difficult to say. But one thing you can say with this is that there is a big enough sample size to at least support that strength will make you big. It might not make you Mr. Olympia, but it will make you like big. And then vice versa. Like, whereas like if someone were to be a bit more like a bodybuilder and have different exercise selection, they still got stronger on those lifts and then like build muscle. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, at the end of the day, I hate to draw comparisons because people are just going to like think I'm contradicting myself, but they're pretty similar. Like strength training and bodybuilding, there's a lot of similarities. But with that being said, there are a ton of differences in the way you actually need to execute and program this stuff.
Yeah.
So
And we kind of
they're
like
not
want to make
polar
clear on them.
opposites, but they will have a little bit of carryover to each other.
Mm.
So one of the points that I wanted to make here is just about the powerlifters and the physiques and everything. Very few people build complete physiques just from powerlifting. This is taking that kind of that sample size you were talking about earlier. The powerlifting approach will work for some people, but it won't for the vast majority. And I'm not saying it won't work as in you won't gain an ounce of muscle. You'll still get results from this. There's no way around that, but you're cutting yourself short. This is where genetics do come into play. Lots of elite powerlifters are jacked, but we have to remember they are elite powerlifters and they're typically genetically gifted. So I'm not somebody to focus a whole ton on genetics, but when you're looking at the best of the best, drugs aside, you're looking at the best of the best. Those are outliers anyways. It's like there's no point in actually comparing to people that far up on the bell curve. So that's just another thing. I mean, if someone has the genetic ability to become an elite powerlifter, odds are they probably have pretty good ability to build some muscle and at least have a good looking physique without really training the details that much. Like you'll see a lot of those guys just have like wide shoulders. They build up their lats and traps and like they can get bigger arms from benching. They get bigger forearms from an isometric hold on a deadlift. Like most people do not respond very well to that stuff. And you need to hammer your isolations a bit more.
That's a good point. Yeah. Cause like, unless you're built like Ed Cohen, who just completely like benefited in every possible way from the big three and like those variations, yeah, you definitely will run into a point where in time where like I need to isolate. So I definitely do agree with that. So that's really good. That's really good. And then one thing that I do want to kind of mention here though is that when there are issues about like, you know, like maybe a possibility of misattribution, like you mentioned, like genetics, drugs, these are things that will kind of skew things in a way that we can't always properly predict, but kind of make good estimates for. So that was really a good point. But there is one thing I do want to say, like, just get stronger does seem to be a bit more valid when you assume that form remains consistent over time. So strength athletes, I remember, I think you had a video talking about like the importance of like checking your form and making sure your form is like staying good over time. Like strength athletes kind of do that, maybe unconsciously, like when they like go go back to a lighter form of training to do another build up. Because like when they have lighter weights, typically their form is something that they kind of like try to think about a bit better, or at least they should, in my opinion. But when it comes to bodybuilders, they need to make sure their form is good, like every single session. Like, is that an accurate statement?
Definitely. I think the difference between bodybuilding and powerlifting, this might sound simple, but with powerlifting, maximize your leverages, hide your weaknesses. Like you should be doing that. You should be maximizing what you can do. Like, yeah, I mean, if you're someone that's like, oh, I got a close grip, 2 full Mississippi second pause on my bench, and I benched 300, but the guy next to you did a huge arch with a wide grip and a smaller pause and got 3 white lights on a 350 bench, like nobody cares that yours was like more impressive. They look at like you're competing against someone else.
Yeah, the
But in
judges in Squad
bodybuilding,
University.
exactly. But when it comes to bodybuilding, the training in the gym doesn't matter. You can get the physique however you want to. If you respond to calisthenics or if you respond to powerlifting or somewhere in the middle with some bodybuilding, it doesn't matter. So don't get caught up in that. Don't get caught up in the ego of these numbers and that in your lifting social status, because at the end of the day, that's just like a hidden little step to actually getting a physique. You shouldn't be paying attention to what people think about you doing in the gym. Pay attention to what your results actually are. I mean, would you really, if your goal is hypertrophy and you're wasting your time trying to like maximize your leverages on a big 3 lift or something, you're kind of missing the point of hypertrophy training. You should be focused on how your physique looks in a year from now, not how did my performance go in that little technical adjustment I made to get a little stronger on that lift. That's a waste of time. It's a smoke screen that's distracting you from your actual long-term goal.
And that's why when it comes to like my power building philosophy, one thing I try to advocate for is that you have a bodybuilder's form, but you try to just get stronger on that. So like, for example, I don't use an excessive arch. I don't maximize like the competition like with grip or anything like that to lift the most amount of weight. If for me, and this is purely because I am trying to get like a bit more of a hypertrophy response from my bench press, my barbell bench press, I will like purposefully like use a grip that lets me use the muscles I'm trying to hit. So like I had this as a point on the other slide where I said form should be optimized for safety and stimulation. If you get stronger with these two considerations, so let's say you lift 315 when you're optimizing safety and stimulation versus like optimizing your leverages, the amount of muscle you will build will be different. At least I believe that to be the case.
Definitely.
And then one other thing I want to mention is that when it comes to like adding weight on the bar, especially for hypertrophy, weight on the bar should never be forced. Like here, we're gentlemen. We do consensual progressive overload. We don't steal that shit. We don't force that shit. We like add weight to the bar when it's needed and when it's necessary. So if your idea of just get stronger is literally add weight week to week to week unending, like, yeah, that's not going to work out for you. But at the same time, I do find that this tends to be a issue when it comes to people who hear, oh, just get stronger doesn't work, so I'm going to do time under tension and mind muscle connection. I don't think there's anyone who has ever time under tension and mind muscle connection their way to the Olympia. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that for sure. I do have a point that I'm not going to counter that argument, but I am going to make a practical use for those two things. In the meantime, most of the notes and the ideas that I have were for this first slide here. So if you don't mind, I do want to take an extra couple minutes and finish this one off. And
good, man.
I don't have as much to say on the next few. So this is a preview of one of my next videos. If anybody's interested, I call it the calves argument. So to briefly summarize my thoughts, the only way to get big calves is to isolate them. That's the reason why it's called the calves argument. This explains the trouble people have growing their calves. Do you really think calves are just impossible to grow? Or do you think people don't train them hard because it's a boring isolation movement? Little food for thought there.
Is that a rhetorical or am I meant to answer this?
No, you don't have to answer that.
Right,
I'm just saying to the viewers.
I didn't prepare to study, bro. Just kidding.
Get ready for that next video. That'll be a good one. In my opinion, my humble opinion.
But yeah, like, all right, so that's it for this first fallacy. So I do think that there is some amount of validity to it, but it assumes different things than what we said earlier about the most common assumptions, right? The second one is like the slippery slope fallacy. So The definition of this one, like a lot of people hear this one a lot, and oftentimes this fallacy I feel like gets misapplied to like literally everything, because we just kind of assume that, oh, I don't like your conclusion or your prediction, so I'm just going to say you're doing a slippery slope. But at the same time, like, uh I'm trying to think of a non-politically charged example. uh well, I do think that everyone kind of has one that comes to their mind. So whatever side of the argument you fall on, you know what you're talking about or what we're talking about. So one thing that I want to say here is that if you tell people just get stronger, then they will become powerlifters, meaning that they'll just add load on the bar, they'll focus on squat, bench, deadlift, and then that's all they really care about. They don't really care about exercise variety, bodybuilding work. They, like, they're not giving the same amount of love, energy, and effort into the smaller muscle groups that, even if they do matter to them, they're not honest with themselves because someone they looked up to, someone with a physique they might have liked, said, oh, just get stronger. So that's like one example, right? The other one is like, if you tell people just get stronger is bad, then they will not get bigger because they don't want to do strength training. And I sometimes see that being the case. Like, me personally, like when I was like managing a different gym, and especially when I was a personal trainer, there was a lot of times where someone would, and we hear this a lot of times with like, girls, a little less now because like, empowerment, I'm all for it. They like that meme of like women not wanting to touch barbells, weights, heavy lifting at all because they think that they'll like become Arnold Schwarzenegger or something like that. So
Reverse now.
yeah, it's reversed now, and like, and we like that stuff. Like, but anyway, that's a topic for another video. But we kind of have this slippery slope where it's just like we kind of assume that when someone hears just get stronger, at the end of the road, they're just gonna like not be where they want to be. They're gonna get a bad result. What are your impressions on like this kind of conclusion?
Yeah. I guess I don't have a whole ton of thoughts on that one. I'll let you continue on with your next couple points.
All right, for sure, for sure. Because like one thing I do 100% agree with you that power lifting specific training will definitely leave out important exercises for a balanced physique. I think one of the reasons why I kind of developed a physique that was, I'm not super impressive by any means, but a bit more well-rounded, in my opinion, is the fact that I really did think that, like, I forgot who told it to me, where I heard it from, or anything like that. But I just remember hearing that, oh, your isolations will make you like more impervious to injury. You're like more injury resistant, and that keeps you training longer. And the longer you train, the stronger you'll get. So then I was just like, okay, don't do only specific work, do everything else, which is probably a conjugate idea. And when it comes to the idea of just getting stronger, I need to reiterate this all the time, because especially for the ones who are like more focused on like, let's say, size and trying to feel the muscle, trying to be empathetic with the muscle, trying to have a connection with it and everything like that, they just try to think that that's how you build a lot of muscle rather than actually progressively overloading over time. Regardless of whatever form that takes, it does need to happen, right? Getting stronger is not squat, bench, dead. And don't do bodybuilding work. Like all you need is squat, bench, dead. Anyone who tells you that is just, like wholly mistaken. I don't think that there's any purely redeeming thing about that. But one thing I do want to say is that, yes, squat, bench, dead will make you bigger, but maybe not in the same amounts for every single person. Like every single person needs to find the big lifts that give them the best results.
Yeah.
So if you incorporate more than just the squat, bench, dead, you do some bodybuilding work, you do a wide variety of sets, reps, and methods in your training, you will need to get stronger in whatever method you apply to your training. So that's why just get stronger can still work, but the part that I just said, flies completely over most people's heads. Like they just think squat, bench, dead.
Yeah. So I guess my thoughts on this one, and this is going to be kind of like my almost more like social view, kind of industry view on how this kind of happened. I think you had a lot of people, and I think we've gone to the other side of the spectrum now, and that's why I actually have my channel to kind of recenter. Not that I have much of a following, but I'm trying to recenter these. I want to say that there's a lot of people that pumped out a lot of BS. They had a lot of bodybuilders that were claiming like, oh, you have to get the burn, you have to get the pump and the mind muscle connection, avoiding progressive overload, and this is how you get bigger. And people got fed up with that. So they're like, oh, I'm just resentful to this. Ignore all that. It's all dumb. It's a waste of time. Just get stronger, train like a powerlifter, because we know it works to an extent for sure. So I think that is too extreme of a reaction. So I think the problem with this is if you're ignoring the pump, if you're ignoring just like hammering a muscle and you're actually ignoring the mind muscle connection, you're missing out. Let's say there's no benefits to mind muscle connection in the pump. And I do think there are some benefits. It's definitely not the end all be all, but it's a piece to the puzzle. And I'll save that for another video. But I do think when you ignore those variables, I mean, let's face it, like, let's say, just for the sake of the argument, they don't do you any good. And I'm going to say, aside from extreme cases, they don't do you any bad. They don't hurt you unless you're trying to like feel your quads on a squat. Like that's maybe not optimal or whatever. But in general, especially on isolation and hypertrophy focused movements, the pump and the mind muscle connection isn't going to hurt you. If anything, it benefits you. But for the sake of the argument, let's forget that there's any benefits. Just from the mental benefits of it, getting the pump is so much fun. Feeling the muscle that's supposed to be working, actually working is so much fun. That's what makes isolation movements fun and enjoyable. Right now, people don't enjoy them. Like, especially where me and you kind of got into lifting and the whole power building, we resent bodybuilding type of phase, like in the bigger picture of the industry, we're missing a huge piece of our training. And that's the enjoyment of it. It's getting the pump. Yeah, that's not the primary driver of hypertrophy by any means, but one, it's a little piece of the puzzle, and two, it's so fun. Like, just get a pump. It's not going to hurt you. It makes you want to train and want to crush those isolation hypertrophy movements. So that's my mini rant on that. So I'll let you continue on.
Hey, that's a good mini rant. And like one thing I will say is like, if you've ever gotten a pump and a gym with really, really good lighting, oh bro, you're gonna want to go back every single day. And like, oh yeah, like it really does make sense. And like one thing I want to say with my opinion on like pump, mind muscle connection, time under tension, and all that, right? Like you said, they're not the end all be all, but I do think that they are super important. One thing that you can do to really fuck up your training for strength and for size is just have this paradigm of carryover. Does it carry over to my bench? Does it carry over to my squat? Does it carry over to my deadlift? You will find that this kind of mindset, at least I found that this kind of mindset, it kind of robbed me of my joy in training. So I kept thinking to myself, like, I'm committed to variations I don't necessarily like. I'm committed to movements I don't necessarily enjoy. While I do like the squat, bench, deadlift, while I do have a squat, bench, and deadlift goal, there's some versions of the lifts themselves that I just don't really find all that like exciting to train. And by constantly thinking to yourself that carryover is this hard rule standard, no, like your exercise selection should not be based off of the internet's general like, let's say, consensus on what lifts give you the best carryover. You should check which lifts you enjoy the most and give you that good mind muscle connection, that good and a good pump, and then use that and like milk that for as long as you possibly can. That's typically my recommendation with it. But at the same time, you can force a pump, in my opinion. Like if I just do endless amounts of push-ups, yeah, I'll probably get a pump. Like if I just do like nothing but flies, yeah, I'll probably get a pump. Like there's a lot of exercises that I can do that just pump up the muscle, but because the pump is the goal rather than a actual side effect of a good movement that I can progressively overload over time, then I think that that's kind of like where the issues come up with that. So
Agreed.
Yep. And then one thing I want to say with like this slippery slope thing, I really think that the people who buy into this are like the power coppers or power copers, like the people who just think to themselves like they get really upset when they see someone who is like more aesthetic than them. But hey man, my deadlift is better than your deadlift, or you pull sumo and wear Gymshark and I wear nothing but elite FTS and like do starting strength like 10 times in my life. Like I really think it's those kinds of people who think to themselves like, oh, like if you tell someone just get stronger, they need to become a powerlifter or else they won't get big. Or if someone doesn't believe in just get stronger, they're going to stay small forever, which is obviously not the case. So, because we have examples of that as well. Yeah. And one thing I will say this is, if you believe just get stronger and you do not believe in variations or other bodybuilding work, just getting stronger is poor advice because it's so incomplete. You will still get bigger, but it won't be like a complete physique and it will not be aesthetic by any means. I remember like when I focused almost entirely on powerlifting training, I was kind of fortunate at that point in time where my arms looked kind of good just because I was leaner at the time because of running all the time. But when I looked at my back, I really did feel like I was built like a refrigerator, big quads, big back, big chest. And then my arms, like you had to get it in the perfect lighting and with a slight pump for me to feel like I looked a little like normal. But I was like, yeah, this ain't what I was aiming for, Chief. So I had to like move on from there. And like I started like adding in like more stuff again. So that's the slippery slope one. So let's move on to the next one. And did I skip number 3? Looks like I skipped number 3. Well, we're gonna move past number 3. But this one is the straw man. So, everyone knows an example of the straw man where it's just like, so what you're saying is like, let's say, for example, uh, like my favorite food is a sandwich. And then someone says, so you're telling me to make you a sandwich. And then, it just kind of like goes into a horrible thing from there. But one thing that I hear coming from like people who are more biased towards strength like myself is we kind of like look at people and just like when they tell us like, oh, I don't really care about getting strong, like our initial reaction is like, why do you hate strength training, why do you hate getting stronger, when that's not really what they're saying at all. So I do want to point out that bodybuilders do not hate strength. At least that's not what I think is kind of the case. I think that it's more the case that they hate the assumption that strength training is the only way to get big. And they kind of hate having to deal with people say, like having to ask questions like, well, this person says this person says the squat bench deadlift is the best way. And then you kind of have to go from there. But what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to put my thoughts out as somebody like that purely trains for hypertrophy, and this is just my goal going into it. I'm somebody, I believe we all have genetic strengths and weaknesses. I'm somebody that I've always been strong. Like that was just a genetic strength that I got lucky with. Like it didn't take me long to get strong, especially on like squat bench deadlift. I'm definitely like genetically gifted for stuff like that. And my philosophy is when you have something, you don't necessarily appreciate it. When you're gifted with something, you don't appreciate it. So yes, I was born like a little bit stronger. That's my genetic strength, but I was also thin. So I was like, oh, well, I just want muscle. And I guarantee you, if I was born jacked but was super weak, I'd be like, oh, I just have to get stronger. Like we all kind of have that genetic strength that we don't appreciate because it's genetic. We didn't actually do anything to earn it. And then we have a weakness. We're like, oh, well, I want to improve on that. It's just kind of like how we naturally are as humans. So just from a hypertrophy perspective, I think being in an industry, being in a community that's so dominated by people that actually care about their performance in the gym, when 95% of people in the industry and in the community care so much about their training, like in the gym is where they live, like that's their goal. They want to be the best in that domain that they can within the gym. When it comes to people training for hypertrophy, we're training for outside of the gym. We want to stand out. We want to be bigger. We want to feel confident about ourselves outside of the gym. In the gym, we don't care that much. So when people tell us what to do in the gym and you need to do these lifts and get stronger, and it's like a lift that we don't enjoy, like a squat, bench, or deadlift that build this crazy amount of fatigue without building any more muscle than something like a leg press, then we're like, what, why would I squat when I'm going to have to deload all the time and I risk certain injuries, or it takes me forever to learn the skill of it when I can just go load a bunch of weight on the leg press and do high quality, full range of motion, nice slow sets of 10 or 15 on that. So we're like, why are you pushing your agenda of improving your actual self within the domain of the gym onto me when I don't care at all? I'm just here to make some results and get right out. Yes, a lot of the time we learn to enjoy our training, whatever, for sure. But I would argue that you enjoy being in the gym 10 times more than I enjoy being in the gym. And I still like being in the gym, but our goals are different. Yeah, our goals are different, to summarize it.
Right. Yeah, that was a really good point. And like one question that kind of came up to me is like, do you think that there's like might be a mismatch between the sources of information we have versus what most people actually want? Where like I think part of the reason why like the casual person will like a more bodybuilding page, but that bodybuilding page gives like shit information, because most people want to just look good. Like most people, like strength is a bit more niche, but the thing is, the best information, at least up till this point, now that there's a lot more like good information, like let's say, like of course, like Steve Shaw has been giving out information like forever, but channels like GVS, NH, I think N1 and even Paul Carter, that kind of stuff like is helping a lot, like kind of give like better information for a more hypertrophy focused pursuit. But do you think that for the most part, there's always been like, bodybuilding is what most people want, but what they're given is like, well, you have to go through this wall or this like kind of this obstacle that is strength, saying we're the way that you get big. Do you think that might be a something that's going on right now?
Yeah, well, I think definitely your lifting social status comes into play there.
Mm.
You have to have a certain strength number to be respected by the community that actually takes it seriously enough to understand and think about the science itself. So when you have people that are much more casual about their training, aka bodybuilders or people training for hypertrophy, the reason why we or someone like myself wouldn't care as much is because we don't have as much of an appreciation for training as somebody that is caring about the performance of themselves in the gym. So we just simply don't have the mental energy to spend on the science and the studies. We're just into see what happens. Oh, that guy's big. Let me just copy what he's doing. But low key, he's on trend. So we're like, oh, we're wasting our time. And then at the end of the day, obviously, and I did have a video on this about a month or so ago, strength is easier to measure than hypertrophy. Strength is a hard number. And there's only a couple different factors that couple different variables that will mess with your strength on the day-to-day, but it's a hard number. If you bench more than you did before, you are stronger. It's that simple. Obviously there's more to it, but when it comes to bodybuilding, it's like, okay, well now you have to take into account like diet. Did you sleep? Or did you have sodium? Are you holding water? What's your body fat? Are you measuring in the same place on your bicep? What were your lungs exhaled or inhaled when you measured your chest? Like there's so many weird little variables, and hypertrophy is so tough to measure. And a lot of people involved in the hypertrophy and muscle building industry in the first place are highly insecure. So when you have people that feel small on a certain day or don't feel that big, or maybe they get a pump and they feel bigger, that's where you can't really measure because it's emotional decisions, not a rational, set in stone, concrete. I had 300 bench last year. Now I have a 315 bench. I got stronger. In hypertrophy, it's like, oh, well, I looked big in that photo 2 years ago, but I feel bigger now, but my pictures don't look as big because I'm higher in body fat. And I don't know. I'm just going to change everything I'm doing in my training and change my diet entirely. Like that's the difference, in my opinion.
Interesting. Yeah. I'll definitely have to like think about that a bit more. That's a really good point. So I'm going to continue and like kind of there's a couple points on like this fallacy that I do want to bring up. So going back to like the assumption like that they hate, that they like the idea that strength is the only way to get big is kind of like, not that great, is because it, like I said, it assumes all those 4 issues earlier, where it's like strength being equated to something like squat, bench, and deadlift. There's a strong case that could be made that these are not great for hypertrophy, or at least they're not great in the way that we think. Are they great at building muscle? Yes and no, because they might be great for you, but not be good at all for someone else. So their greatness is not like due to it not being potent, but just whether or not it can be applied to a wide variety of people. This, in my opinion, doesn't prove that the squat and bench and deadlift are bad for hypertrophy. It's just that they may not be the best for all people at all times. And I do believe that. I do think that any person who does use the squat, bench, and deadlift can build a respectable amount of muscle, probably a lot. But I will admit, or at least concede, that for some people, it might not be the best lift for a wide variety of reasons, either because of their leverages or they just don't enjoy it. And as a result, they're not going to train it as hard. One issue that I do have with this kind of logic, though, is that one thing that a lot of like strength focused people could be doing is that they're expanding their definition so much of what strength is that it tries to include the points raised by the points or concerns of like people focused more so on hypertrophy, that we just say like, well, that's what we've been saying this entire time. And then we kind of appropriate their argument. And I actually don't really think this is the case. And like, I do believe that bodybuilding did kind of go to shit at a certain point and powerlifting had to come to correct it, but it went so far forward and bought so much into its own ideas that it stopped being about the people it meant to help. It's not being about people who did want size. It's not being about people who did want to kind of get that. So I do think bodybuilders are correct that if you do desire hypertrophy, your training will be different from a powerlifter's. Um, Powerlifters argue this all the time. Like if someone says like I want to get stronger, like we're so quick to make up these arguments of like, oh, you need to be more specific. But then when someone says like, oh, I want to get bigger, we're like, oh, still do what the powerlifter does. Like for some reason, I think that that's kind of like a weird leap of logic that some powerlifters like kind of take, and it's a really big double standard that I do think does exist. And NH was right to say that it was never about strength, it was just about that social status. So one thought experiment I want to leave for this point is like, imagine a kickboxer who wants to get better at his boxing. If someone tells him, oh, if you want to be a great boxer, just keep doing kickboxing, we would find this immediately to be kind of stupid. They may be similar, but they're not similar, but they are different enough. They are similar, like they're not completely one-to-one. Any time and energy you put into one thing is not going into something else. So that does apply for size and strength. While they will feed into one another, you can't just say like, oh, because I'm focusing so much on strength that I'm going to get the one-to-one ratio of size. But with this being the case, I do still think that getting stronger will never not be a feature. Regardless of how you train, getting stronger is always going to be a feature of that style of training. So that's one thing I kind of want to point out there. What are your thoughts on that last part?
Yeah, well, I think when you think about there's like a bunch of different examples that I like to compare this to in the real world. Like, obviously, yeah, I mean, it makes the most sense to go into the avenue that you want to. So the two thoughts I have on this is I think the people telling you to go a certain route are probably just people that I think there's a lot of powerlifters that are failed bodybuilders. And I do think NH is somebody that brought that up, and I definitely agree with that. There's one person I'm not gonna not gonna name their name. We'll see if I feel like doing it, but I try not to name drop. There's one person who is a very clear failed bodybuilder that always talks about how he's going to cut down and get jacked and how he has 21-inch arms when he doesn't have 21-inch arms. And then he tells people to go powerlift, and he has a 5x5 program. He lies about a lot of other things too, but that's besides the point. People don't want to see people that fail in something, don't want other people to succeed, because if you are a failed bodybuilder and you turn into a powerlifter, which happens, it really does. There's a lot of people that it's happened to. They're going to tell people, oh, go do the same. The last thing they'd want to do is say, oh, well, go do this, something that I couldn't do. And then they're going to go watch the person they just gave that advice to go crush bodybuilding. Like, what do you think that does for their confidence? Especially when you take, we all know who I'm talking about, obviously. When you take somebody like that, I don't think that person's ego would enjoy telling somebody to go train like a bodybuilder and see them actually succeed. I think that would actually hurt that person's ego quite a bit. So that's my thoughts. I did have one other, but it just escaped my brain. Oh yeah. So another thing that I like to compare this to is when you're saying like how strength and AKA, I'm going to, for example, for the example that I have now, I'm going to call strength a skill. When you compare that to hypertrophy, I mean, at the end of the day, everything has a certain like strength or skill to it. Like I remember when iPhones came out, we were all learning how to text. Like the first time we texted, we were like pressing like random button super slow, but then we learned the like strength, AKA the skill of that. Now we can text with one hand behind our back when we're walking, not even looking at our phone in 2 seconds. You know what I mean? So everything has a skill component to it. And obviously, the more you do it, the better you get at it. So you can't separate like skill or strength from everything. So yes, when you're training for hypertrophy, that skill and that strength will come with it.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah, very, very good points. Very good points. Let's move on to the next one. And this is like a pretty short one because this is the one that kind of like, it's really simple. Like it's an either or fallacy. You will either get strong or you will stay small, or like you either get big and like strength is unimportant. You know, like you're either going to get big or you're going to get strong. these are your only two choices. They're so different from each other that they just like are not even like anything close to being related. And I think what you just said actually like kind of like fleshes that out pretty well. So the problem that I see with like any type of argument when it comes to like this either or kind of thinking is that the definition of size and strength is not consistent between any of them. Like I said, like someone who believes that strength is just getting stronger, well, that's really broad and it's kind of like a catch-all kind of like definition. Like, oh, as long as you're getting stronger, that's strength training. But like for powerlifting, that's not really the case. Strength in powerlifting is literally 1 rep max and squat, bench, deadlift. But strength in a general context is not that at all. Strength is more akin to that former definition, where it's just, are you getting stronger over time? And time frame is like actually like a pretty big important thing. Like whether it's like a 10 weeks, whether it's like a couple, like maybe 4 months, 6 months, a year, like these timeframes are important. So one thing I do want to say with this though is that just getting stronger, in my opinion, is valid because it is not the 1 rep max that gives you the size. It's all the work that comes before it that necessitates the 1 rep max, which is why I don't like anytime I like review a program, I see people program in PRs basically. Like they're hitting a certain number that I'm just like, have you hit this number before? And they said, no, but I mean, like I'm trying to linear progress. And I'm just like, well, you're basically like trying to hit a PR every single week. That's not how training works. Trainings don't have like PRs don't just happen in your training because you write it down. Like you actually need to put in a substantial amount of time and effort before you can actually get that PR. So, and one other thing that's really important here is that for the like just getting stronger to be valid, it does need to assume that form is consistent, that you're like whatever amount of pausing you're doing, whatever amount of tempo you're doing does remain pretty consistent over time. But what are your kind of thoughts on this either or kind of thought process?
Yeah, I mean, in general, like you can get both. And if you're going to get strong, you're not going to stay tiny. And if you get big, you're not going to stay weak. Like there obviously is some type of correlation to this, but I think the biggest thing that I guess I would like to say is when you're training for hypertrophy, obviously you're building your foundation to pursue strength if you ever do want to. It's very easy for a bodybuilder to get strong compared to somebody that's never been in the gym before. So a bodybuilder will typically have untapped potential that does not take them very long to eventually pursue strength and kind of have the best of both worlds and train a little bit more like a power builder. And the same goes for the other way around. So when you're a strength athlete and you're a power lifter, it will be very easy for that person to go into a little bit more of a hypertrophy focused training and build up a decent amount of muscle. So those are pretty much my thoughts on these.
And one thing I'll finish off with this fallacy is that I am not trying to say that they are one and the same, but they are always going to be connected with one another. One video that I have kind of like, I'm still kind of writing out is that you can't separate the two, but that doesn't mean they're the same entity. Just because they're inseparable doesn't mean they're one thing. So that's an idea that I'll like build up and kind of like flesh out in another video. But then this is going to be like, I have a lot of videos kind of lined up for like actually teaching logic, like actually kind of breaking down what logic actually looks like. So here's like kind of what most logic kind of does look like, and that's gonna like come with this. This is a type of logic that I see a shit ton, and it's the kind of logic that actually makes me just like cringe in my soul, and it's called affirming the consequence. So one thing that people don't understand when it comes to logic, this is the most like and every single logic class that I've ever taken, this is the idea that trips up the people most. A valid argument does not mean that it is like, let's say, correct, true, or whatever word you want to like kind of like put in there, right? A valid argument does not depend on the content to make it valid. It just depends on the form. So there's a lot of ways you can like skew an argument and like trying to put in like even true ideas and true premises, whatnot, and it'll still come out wrong or invalid. Validity has nothing to do with the content of the argument. So what do I mean by this? I'm going to have a couple examples, but the first thing I want to say when it comes to affirming the consequent, it looks like this. If A, then B. B happens, therefore A happened. So if it rains, the sidewalk will be wet. The sidewalk is wet, therefore it rained. The reason why it's invalid is because there's a lot of other things that could have caused the sidewalk to be wet. A sprinkler went off, someone spilled their drink. But let's say, for example, it was the other way around. If A, then B. A happens, then B happens. That's always going to be valid no matter what, because if we assume the first premise, if it rains, it will be wet, and it rains, then because A happened, B is going to happen. But the thing is, we kind of like skew it around, and there's a lot of ways that we kind of like create this circular reasoning where it's like, if I get stronger, I will be bigger. I got bigger, therefore I'm stronger. These are all three like true statements in my opinion, but it's still an invalid argument because it has the same form as the one that we just mentioned with like the sidewalk and everything. A valid argument is one in which, if the premises are true, it's impossible for the conclusion to be false. So let me show you what example of like what that looks like. So all cats are mammals, all dogs are mammals, all cats are dogs. Like if we hear that, we just think that's stupid, right? But here's like something that does it, that's why I said like it's kind of easy to hide true logic or true facts and put it into shitty logic, but because they're true facts, we think that it's like really, really good. I think there's a lot of like science-based or evidence-based like channels, coaches, whatever have you, or a lot of the arguments that you see on the internet, especially that these kind of like come up in, where it's like even if like what they're saying is true, the conclusion that they got from it, the conclusion doesn't come from the premises. So all cats are vertebrates, all mammals are vertebrates, all cats are mammals. These are all three true statements, but the conclusion that all cats are mammals does not come from the premises that came before it. So the reason why I put that all in there, I know it's like, what the hell does cats, mammals, and all that have to do with like strength training and everything like that? It has to do with how we actually communicate our information. When we give information, we have to make sure we're not making this fallacy, because it's the easiest one where we can put in true statements and assume that because the statements themselves are true, that our conclusion must be. And that's like a huge leap in logic that I just feel like we just never call out because people aren't aware of it. So I just feel like this is an easy way to kind of give people the tool to say like, wait, you have true premises, you're presenting to me true facts, but the conclusion you've came to did not come from the truth of those facts. So there is some truth to like, yes, if you get stronger and then you'll be bigger and whatnot, right? There's some truth to that, but you getting bigger is more of a byproduct. Like what you saw was a result, an effect. Like the effect of getting stronger is size, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the cause. What is the cause of getting stronger? Reps, volume, intensity, proximity to failure, exercise selection, consistent form over time, and of course, progressive overload. But like, just to say that it's just one thing, it's just this, it's just that, like that's a really incomplete thing, even if the other things you say around it are true. So you can't just give a half-baked truth and expect that to be your entire like argument, your entire like logic and everything like that. Like maybe you improve your rep quality, your mind muscle connection, you chose a better exercise variation. These are all things that can lead to getting bigger that are being left out by just trying to hammer in like other facts about training and whatever you else want to say. So if you get stronger, but you assume that the part of you getting stronger is the only thing that has ever mattered to you getting bigger, then I do think you are mistaken. Like, I know that was a very long-winded kind of thing, but what are your kind of thoughts on like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're pretty right about I guess a fault in our own logic when it comes to some of this stuff, because we just hear a claim and we hear two things that are associated together and we immediately assume that that's correct. But I think you just proved that a lot of this stuff can be invalid and there is a fault in our logic. So I'd say there's nobody better to explain this stuff than you. So I can appreciate that for sure.
Thanks, man. I really do appreciate that, because like I like see this like I said, this is the thing that I see the most. Like people will have, because like people like, you know, anyone who is like a bit of a snake oil salesman, they're not necessarily dumb. They can find like facts or ideas that are true enough, supported enough, and then come to a conclusion that on the surface sounds good. But then when you kind of dig deeper into it, you've come to find that that conclusion, even if it is true, it's not true because of what they said. So these are like the fallacies we kind of have surrounding it. And I just wanted to like really jump into the thought process behind it, because regardless of what you kind of like argue for, believe, or and whatnot, Like, you having good logic and you having a clear understanding is what will make you a better lifter in the long run. I'm not saying you need to take a philosophy class or whatever, but don't be tricked into thinking like, just do this, don't do that, don't do this. Like, really examine the logic behind it. And this is like part of that research thing. So if you are on that road of trying to become a bigger, smarter, stronger lifter, you're going to have to sift through a lot of bad logic. And that's why myself and Landon wanted to kind of help with that. So if you found this video interesting, please like, comment, and subscribe. Landon, if you would like to kind of like plug in your channel again and like what you're about.
Yeah, so appreciate it. My channel is called Basement Bodybuilding. We are generally, when I say we, I mean myself. There's nobody else on my channel other than all of Karel on every now and then. But my channel is hypertrophy focused. The way that I like to describe it is I'm not somebody that's trying to reinvent the wheel, but I am trying to view the wheel itself from a different perspective. So I spend a lot of time thinking and experimenting. I was like, should I say experiencing or experimenting? So I spend a lot of time kind of analyzing my experience and experimenting in my own training to figure some of this stuff out. I think about it a lot, and I try and find some faults in a lot of logic, like Karel just talked about towards the end of this. So yeah, I mean, my channel is, I want to say it's mostly new arguments or newer philosophies. So feel free to check it out. Yeah, I mean, I would really appreciate it if you guys took a look. Let me know what you thought. But yeah, my channel is just here to kind of start some conversations and have some fun with it. Nothing too serious. So yeah, check it out if you want to.
Yeah, and if you are following my channel and not his, unsubscribe right now. But yeah, like really do appreciate having you on. I really do appreciate your outlook and input, because as someone who is more strength focused, but I do care about the other side of it as well, and I want to like understand both sides, so that way I'm not giving out bad information for anyone who does decide to like hop on my channel. I really do appreciate you. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for everyone watching. So have a good day. How do is it still recording?
See record.